Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Brown Bears podcast. I'm your host, Scott Cordischi. Glad you could join us. The Brown Bears podcast, well, it normally comes your way during the academic and athletic year from September until the beginning of May. We normally take the summers off, but the reason we're back for this one special episode is because we're going to pay tribute to three great alumni who recently passed away. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But first things first, let me welcome our guests to the podcast. And we have with us from the class of 79, former Brown Bear, former head coach as well from 1994 through 1997, Mark Whipple. Coach Whipple, how are you?
Hey, how's everybody doing? Welcome, Brunonians. I'm doing good.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Whip, and you were the guy that came up with this great idea, and I'll get into that in just a moment. We also have our current head coach from the class of 2000, James Perry. Coach Perry, how are you?
Doing great, Scott. Thanks.
Well, thank you for being with us, Coach Perry. From the class of 99, we have a former wide receiver, and he was an all-time great, that's for sure. Sean Morey is with us. Sean, how are you?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks.
Well,
Good to
thanks for
see you
joining
guys.
us. And we've got another great former All-Ivy linebacker, two-time All-Ivy linebacker from the class of 2003, Jeremiah Watts. Jeremiah, how are you?
I'm great, Scott. It's great to be here today.
Well, thank you all for being here. And, Coach Whipple, I want to give you credit because the reason we're doing this podcast is Brown University and Brown football in particular lost three unbelievable men, great alumni, in the span of just a few weeks back in January. Brian Wallace from the class of 54, Frank Kennedy from the class of 1959, and Tony Gould from the class of 1964. And Whip, you called me. This was your idea. You said, Scott, I've been around college football. I know you've been at Pitt, you've been at Miami, Nebraska, so on and so forth. And you said, I don't know if I've ever run into a group of more loyal alums than those three guys. And so you felt it would be nice if somehow, some way we could pay tribute to them, whether it would be having the Providence Journal write a story or have a story on brownbears.com. And so that's why we came up with this idea of a podcast. But I want to thank you, Whip, for reaching out and thinking of doing something like this for these three guys because they really do deserve it.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's the least we could do. You're talking about three great men who never once had any hint of negativism towards Brown football or the university. And as I said, I've coached a lot of places, and I've never come across anybody that are close to these guys. And they were welcome in the building, and they were positive all the way through. And even after I left, we stayed close friends, and just great people, great people.
And Coach Perry, maybe we'll throw it to you now. And obviously, you know what these three guys meant to Brown football, not just as a head coach, but as your days as a player. I mean, Frank Kennedy, a Merrimack Valley guy from Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I know how influential Frank was to you, to the Perry family, to the Finneran family, to the Farnham family. I mean, he was a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, Whip recruited me, but Frank Kennedy recruited me just as hard. And I think there's a bunch of people in the Merrimack Valley who felt the same way. And, when I think about it, Tony and Brian, I went to all three services this spring, and it was just unbelievable tributes to all three men. And for me, each one that I went to, I thought about the fact that this is like 30-year relationships, and they weren't passing through Brown football. They were so immersed in people's lives and how we were doing. And like Coach Whip said, always positive and trying to help. So, yeah, you're talking, for me, it was like a 30-year relationship with all three guys. And I think for Whip, it probably goes back even further, but amazing. Just an amazing to over that many decades, the support they had for so many.
And Whip, you said to me too, you said it's more about just, donating to the program, so to speak, right? More than just a monetary thing. These guys bled Brown, and these guys would do anything for Brown football coaches, Brown football student athletes. I mean, that's where their loyalty really kicked in, right? I mean, what they did for our student athletes, whether, telling them that going to Brown would be a great thing for them and their futures, or after they graduate, helping them get jobs or, network and make connections. I mean, it's their impact went so far beyond what they donated monetarily to the program.
Well, no question. Plus summer jobs in those early days, there weren't any summer workouts. So guys needed money to pay for tuition and take care of loans and those things. But as I said, anytime they walked in the building, they were smile on their face, everything was positive. After games, there was never any kind of backlash at all. It just were just tremendous Brunonians, and just had so much to do with the success of Brown football.
Jeremiah, Tony Gould was well known in the DMV area. We've had so many great players play for this program coming out of the, DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And I know he was very close to you and meant a lot to you and did a lot for you. Can you explain what Tony Gould meant to you, Jeremiah?
Man, Tony Gould was about as close to kind of an angel as it gets in my life personally. When I shared this at his memorial service a couple months ago, but I've kind of got to share the story a little bit, just how it started and all the way through. But I come from humble beginnings, a single parent mom, with a couple kids living in a little apartment complex in Greenbelt, Maryland, right up the street here. And as a high school senior, I get a random cold call phone call one day from a guy who introduces himself to my mom, and as a 17-year-old kid introduced himself to me. And he said, he's Tony Gould, and asked me had I heard of Brown University, and let me know they were a pretty good school up north. And long story short, he ends up getting my head coach connected with the coaching staff at Brown. And lo and behold, I end up at Brown University, the following year. And then the story doesn't stop there, though. Fast forward to, I'm a senior at Brown, and Tony stayed in touch every step of the way. I mean, he was a mentor of mine all the way through all 4 years. And Tony ends up introducing me to what became my career with another Brown alumni, a guy named Brian Wallace, who graduated, 13 years or so prior. And I end up in the construction industry, working for one of the big national general contractors. And that was Tony's kind of connection, right? And again, just supporting me in my journey. And then, I guess 12 years later, now I am actually the founder and owner of my own commercial construction company. 10 years in, with visions of going national and doing all this stuff. And I can trace it all back, though, right, to Tony and his influence. And the thing that really blew me away, though, about Tony was, attending his memorial service down at his old school, Woodbury Forest School in Woodbury Forest, Virginia. And James, I think you can attest to this, is I thought my story was incredible, but I heard dozens of stories just like this. And it just blew my mind how, I don't know how he found the time to not only make these one-off connections, but to follow up and stay in touch with, countless men, young men through the years. So just incredible stuff. And Tony was one of the best.
Coach Perry, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and it was remarkable. It was an emotional day. You see big, strong football players getting up, recounting these stories that Jeremiah just so well put, and really being emotional about how much Tony meant to him. And how much he meant to all those guys is one thing, but as far as getting some really good players to Brown, but then what he did from the follow through perspective was equally remarkable. I mean, guys like Scott McCaleb spoke beautifully that day, but I mean, it's like he said, it's like dozens of guys who have great stories about how he had the follow through to make sure that they were doing well, even after kind of getting them to go to Brown.
Sean, Brian Wallace was one of a kind. When they made him, they broke the mold. He was truly an original. And I have plenty stories that I could share about Brian Wallace and going on the road with him. He'd drive in the rent-a-car with me and Chris Hum when we'd go to road games, and the stories he would tell us are just unbelievable. They'll be with me for the rest of my life. But more importantly, he was close to a lot of players. I mean, he would do anything for you guys. And I know you were close to Brian, and if I'm not mistaken, you worked for Brian, right? During the summer. Talk to us about Brian Wallace and what he meant to you.
Um, I think it's pretty fair to say, well, it's pretty fair to say that Brian meant a lot to a lot of people. And I have three daughters, and as I can't believe them. I've gotten. I went to his services, his celebration of life, and we enjoyed so much hearing his daughters speak about him and how awesome it was, that like how they thought of him, but how amazing his daughters and wife made his life so complete. And I think Brian, because he was so influential in everyone else's life, he invested himself into their lives. He was a mentor. He had fun. Whether or not he was like scaring the death out of you. I mean, I grew up on the ocean, and I was never more terrified than when I was on his boat. But
He never
and
jumped off, did he?
yeah, that's right. He never did that to me. But you know, I did. I worked on his property, but and those were long days, and he would challenge me based on the number of loads of dirt that he could bring down to the bottom to raise the level of the land compared to like, Tommy or Louis Cole. And those guys, a lot of people have known him for 50 years. I've personally only known Brian for 30 or so. But he was one of the best, closest friends and mentors, and one of the most influential people I think of when I think of Brown football. I mean, you've got Whip and James clearly, and Coach Estes and John Perry, and like there's just so many people. But when I can honestly think, if on one hand, if I had to name, you know, five of the people that were most influential in my life that helped me be a better person, helped me understand how to, be Brian was the original, girl dad, and he loved his daughters, and he would stay up every night reading to them, and then every week he would give them new lists of vocabulary to learn, and he would, and his daughters are just so precious. And when they spoke on behalf of him, I couldn't help but think, if Brian was sitting there with his hands crossed underhand, with hip to one side and a smirk on his face, he would just be so proud. Yep. And so unabashedly proud of the way that his daughters have turned out. He was such a great dad. But love is the definition of investing yourself in the spiritual development of other people. Brian invested in Brown football. Every player, every coach. He always showed up. And I think Brian just taught me so much about how to show up, for how to treat other people, the people that are your true friends. And he used to say, a wealthy man is a man owed many favors. And I think, I can't think of anybody in my life that I've encountered that has had more of an influence on other people than Brian Wallace.
You mentioned two words in conjunction with Brian: love and fun. And I bet you everybody on the Zoom probably at one point or another saw this video. It went viral on Facebook, and then the national news picked it up. It was during COVID when we couldn't see each other, right? Everybody was masked up, and you weren't allowed to go to your relative's house. And his daughter came to see him and was outside the sliding glass doors of his house, and they were dancing to music. He was inside dancing. She was outside. But it truly,
yes, cursed with Irish rhythm, but would never sit down and dance.
I mean, in Whip, just the little things like win or loss. He's showing up in the football office every week with bags full of cold cuts and bread for the coaches, because he knows the long hours that you guys put in during the season, and you don't have time to go out and grab a bite to eat. You're breaking down film of your last game. You're breaking down film of your new opponent. You've got practice. You've got this. You've got that. And he'd just show up, and he'd be there knowing that, any little thing he could do to help you guys, he'd do it.
Yeah, he no, I don't think he ever missed a freshman game. He didn't on Friday. He didn't miss a varsity game. And he didn't miss a JV game all my time there Sunday. And one classic story, my first year at Brown in 1994 as the head coach, he called and says, "Hey, Holy Cross is playing the week before we open." And I gave the players that weekend off before we played Yale. So he says, "I'll come down and we'll go watch Holy Cross." So he comes down in his Lincoln Town Car. I get in, Phil Estes and Joe Worth. We get in the car and we drive to Worcester. We pull into the parking lot, and guy there says it'd be $10 to park. And so I reach over, Brian. I said, "Here's money for you." Brian goes, "No, I've got it." I said, "No, Brian, this is Brown football. I got it." He goes, "No, I got it." Shoves my hand away and hands the guy $100 bill. The guy gives him $90 in change, $10 parking, and he looks over at me. He goes, "Screw Holy Cross. I hate them. That was a counterfeit 100. I just made $90."
Yep, that's Brian. That is Brian. Coach, as we remember these three, obviously, I mean, they all passed within a matter of weeks back in January. But it's not to say there aren't so many great alumni, right? That we've lost in recent years. The John Barrelsons, the Artie Jakowskis, the Gordon Perrys, the Dick Carolins of the world. The list goes on and on and on of all the great alumni that have made such a huge impact on our program.
Yeah, I mean, every time I see Steve Jordan, probably the best player ever played at Brown, obviously all pro, was he always mentions Kilgore McFarland. And we had like a bunch of captains from Arizona. I would not have gone to Brown without Kilgore McFarland. And this kind of podcast, I just think is for people to make sure they're doing all they can for Brown football. That these men beforehand just made the huge difference in so many people's lives, and that's what Brown's all about.
And James, maybe that could be a small, unbelievable byproduct of us doing this podcast to remember those three great men. Maybe we'll have other young alumni step into those roles. I mean, I hear Jeremiah's story and it's so impactful, right? To think of the impact that Tony Gould had him from the time he was in high school to where he is today, the owner of his own commercial construction company. But the point is, I remember when I was director of football operations, getting emails and calls from Tony, "Hey, you guys ought to take a look at this kid down in Virginia. He's a pretty good player and, he might be a great fit at Brown." But hopefully we get other guys that step into that role and kind of do the same thing for Brown football that Tony and Brian and Frank did.
Yeah, I think two of them are on the call, and I really appreciate it. Both Sean and Jeremiah are great mentors, and whenever this year we had 60 guys at the career day, and I can promise you all three, Tony, Brian, and Frank, are smiling when they see those young guys getting involved the way they are, and taking people under their wing and helping them out. And heck, I'm a product of Whip. I'm sitting in the same room Whip sat in, and when he coached me, so I think that's kind of a really cool thing about Brown and Brown football, right? That to have that lineage that we're all passing on and hopefully doing right by the people who did things before us. It's hard to replace these three though. So I'll be leaning on Jeremiah and Sean to help our current players, but those are some big, big, big shoes to fill. And I think, and I'd be curious to see what Sean or Jeremiah say about this, but like one of the things that I'm trying to do is I tried to have a dinner for Frank. He passed away like a week before it happened. And the O'Brien family, Farnham family, Finneran family, we all kind of talking about it. So, I do, unfortunately, he died like the literally the week before it was supposed to happen. But I think it's important that we pass the torch down to guys like Jeremiah and Sean here to help mentor guys. But it's also important that we kind of tip our hat to the current older guys who are doing a great job for the program, and
Yeah.
who are our current Iron Men like Brian, Frank, and Tony were.
Jeremiah, I look back and you were class of '03. So your freshman year, we won an Ivy championship, correct, in '99?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And then I'm going to say that you and your class maybe laid the foundation for future success in '05. In fact, a fellow DMVer, if you will, on the other side of the ball, Nick Hardigan, helped lead the Bears to the '05 Ivy
Oh, yeah.
title. But just talk to us about your 4 years as a part of this program, and looking back, what it meant to you.
Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, coming up to Brown, and it was such a change of scenery and just a breath of fresh air, and just the exposure and the network and the teammates and the coaching staff. It definitely just changed the trajectory, obviously, of my life. And it's one of those things when you're there, you don't appreciate it as much, but as time goes on and you're further and further removed, you realize the impact, and it's certainly a place that I hold near and dear. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is, as we're having this conversation, and obviously the impact of these great men that they've had on individual players, but man, it's even bigger than that, because it's like, as we have, as their impact on us has changed kind of our own trajectories, I'm thinking about how I can pay that forward, and the impact that this is going to make on my family and what we're doing. But the other, as James said, putting me in a position to be able to give back and pay it forward and impact other lives, like, it's just pretty cool. It's just pretty cool to think of, think of the ripple effect, that, again, going back to the original guys we're talking about here, and just the countless others, that contribute to this program and that breed, what we're doing is pretty cool to think about.
Sean, I think back to your days, and I moved to Rhode Island in February of 1994 from Massachusetts. So that's right when Whip took over. And I immediately became involved with Brown football. In 1994, I was doing the public address announcing in the press box for Brown football home games. Before, in '95, I started doing the games on the radio. But I just remember what you and Coach Perry, and before James, Jason McCullough, helped Coach Whipple do, and that is just change the culture of Brown football. And I know Whip won't take credit for it, but let me tell you something. Brown football was so fun to watch. It had been down before he came back to his alma mater in 1994. And all of a sudden, we're doing stuff that nobody else is doing. We're chucking it all over the place when most teams are still running the football on first down, on second down. Maybe they'll pass on third down before they punt it. Not Brown football. It was just a different game that you guys, I think, revolutionized the way football was played in the Ivy League. Now everybody throws it all over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
just
are you going to answer, Whip, for yourself, or do you want me
nah,
to
go ahead,
please brag about you? Because I would appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit. I won't. I don't want to. I don't want to do the comparison of like the Mark Whipple, the Whiplash offense at Brown University versus Mark Whipple, the quarterbacks coach of the Super Bowl winning champion Pittsburgh Steelers. But Whip was like a quarterback whisperer for Ben. And then, but my years, from what I remember, I mean, he, like, you want to talk about change the culture. We were doing some of the most innovative things, clearly, that, like, if I compare them from like I played in a lot of them, like different offenses throughout the NFL, whether it was the West Coast offense or, some of the more innovative things that I thought that Pittsburgh did. Whip was like taking advantage of teams in a way that nobody had done. And James, sorry, James, you had a great arm, but it wasn't that great. Like Whip was like literally just coached, he trained us. And he changed the culture. I mean, there's nothing any coach could have put on me after I played for Coach Whip in the NFL that, like, I'd already been through it. I understood like what the expectations were. And I
Hey,
knew how to
Sean,
work.
what's this? Sean, what's this quarterback whispering? He never once whispered at me.
That's the question.
My
That's
ears
the question
would be
Mark Coach
ringing.
Whip can
This
answer.
quarterback whispering was something that he developed afterward.
just short 4-letter words.
So,
Um, but honestly, I'd like to, if I can steal a little bit more time, I apologize, but Whip is an incredible coach. I've been blessed with all the coaches I've ever had, and I was so grateful that Coach Whipple recruited me and gave me an opportunity to go to Brown because Brown did, like, um, he has changed the trajectory of our lives for the best, and I think that there's a lot of alumni that invest in us, athletes, and give jobs and come back. But were there anyone that we like really could memorize like every roster from every name and location where they grew up? There's the high school statistics. I just think Brian was just I feel like the man just invested so much. Brian, James, can you tell me of any other alumni right now that are that? I mean, maybe it's changed because Brian was essentially
Yeah, no,
retired by the time.
honestly, and the quantity of results, Sean, is unparalleled. So no, I can't. I wish I could tell you somebody could have their fingerprints on as many uh people that Brian had, Massachusetts, in that way. Yeah, no, it's amazing, and he'd have the newspaper clippings to prove it, of every single player that was any good in like a 120-mile radius.
Whip, what do you remember about your 4 years here as head coach?
At Brown,
Yeah.
well, I'll give John Anderson a lot of credit. Um, the first two games of my senior year, I was preseason Ivy Player of the Year, and I tanked it. I was down at Brian Wallace's house too much in the summer, and we went 0-2, and then I came in. It was probably the lowest I'd ever been on as an athlete. And John Anderson said, "We made a decision, and we want you to call the plays." And so at that point, I didn't go to class very much. I just went in the football office, and they let me call the plays the next. And then we ended up playing for the Ivy Championship. Unfortunately, lost to Dartmouth, but really led to me becoming a coach. And I give it credit to those guys and be able to rally the players. And I gave the pregame speeches, and really led me to have an unbelievable life and a lot of great friends.
Jeremiah, you mentioned you own your own construction company now. How many years has it been since you founded your company?
So yeah, D Watts Construction, we're 10 years in. So we're celebrating our 10th year in business this year, which
Wow.
is pretty cool.
And
Congrats.
are you based down in Washington?
We are. We're based in the DC DMV area, Northern Virginia. And it's cool because at this point now we've got exciting plans to expand and geographically in different sectors and again, like this conversation, like just jumping on it again, because there's that special guy named Tony, who I can just trace it back. And, even getting into real estate, I didn't even considered real estate, and here I am today and talk about that ripple effect, right? Like I look at my employees now and their families and like the things we're doing and the values that I preach and again, it's just cool. It's just cool to kind of, just let it all sink in, the impact.
Sean, an amazing NFL career for you, which included playing in a couple of Super Bowls, winning one with Whip with the Pittsburgh Steelers. What are you doing now?
So I was coaching high school football.
Yeah.
I was hired as a coach, coaching the Princeton sprint football team. Did that for a couple of years before the university elected to discontinue the sport and make it a club co-ed flag football sport. Recently, I've launched a startup company called Spark Labs, and we're essentially using custom engineered nano diamonds to embed those into collectibles, articles of memorabilia, whether it be in the inks for autographs or jerseys and apparel or game used equipment. So we've been really sort of hunting down some leads to figure out what is the best product market fit for the next few months. and hopefully by the fall we'll have earned a purchase order or some MOU with some of the larger companies in the industry.
And am I correct in saying your wife just got a new job in professional hockey as well? She's leaving her post at Princeton?
Yep, she will be a graduate of 2000. She'll be the general manager of the expansion team in Vancouver for the Professional Women's Hockey League.
Oh,
Yep.
that's awesome. Congratulations. Whip, how about you? You enjoying retirement? Are you out in Arizona playing a lot of golf or what?
I'm not playing much golf, but yeah, I'm in Arizona, and I'll be back sometime this summer, like James asked me earlier, or in the fall. So just enjoying life and no complaints, So got a beautiful house here, and I travel a little bit, but just enjoying things. I go down to Arizona State. I go to local high school once in a while. So keep my hands in it and talk to a lot of people.
Maybe we can
We
get
gotta, when he comes, Scott, I'm gonna put him to work. I can promise you that.
I think we got
last summer. That's why I asked. Last summer, he spent 3 days in the office and watching film. It was awesome. So we gotta get him this fall.
to get you up here for the BFA Golf Classic. You know, all those mid and late 70s guys, they'll be out in big numbers.
Yeah, I probably will just that way. So,
yeah.
We were at the golf tournament this past summer.
Yep.
And Whip rolls up in his cart. I say, Coach, how do you see this putt? He goes, about 70%, hit it 70% left to right, 2 cups. You sure? Yep. I drained a putt. Like, he's never wrong. Never wrong.
something to be said about brainwashing.
Coach Perry, how did
yeah,
practice go this spring? I know you added some new coaches to your staff, but how did things go this spring for the team?
Yeah, the kids are doing great, and we got a huge number here this summer, Scott. We a record since I've been here, and Whip alluded to the fact that these guys have to work, and actually drawing those connections, internship wise, or just getting a job wise, has been very, very successful. So, yeah, we got a huge group here working out right now, and the guys that are home are working their butts off to make 2025 a great one. And amazingly, for everybody on this Zoom, it's 100 years at Brown Stadium. So Georgetown will not only be the home opener, the season opener, it'll be the first game of the 100th season at Brown Stadium. So I think the 3 guys that we're celebrating on this Zoom will be looking down on Brown Stadium for the 100th year, and the players and I are certainly pumped to put our best foot forward.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Can't wait for it, Coach. And guys, again, I want to thank you all for doing this podcast. And Whip, a special thanks to you for coming up with this great idea. Can't think of a better way to honor the memories of Frank Kennedy, Brian Wallace, and Tony Gould. They certainly deserve something like this.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Great job, Scott.
Yep.
Great job, Scott.
Be well, Jeremiah, Sean, Whip. Hope to see you guys here in Providence at some point. And Coach Perry, can't wait to get the 2025 season underway this fall.
Yeah, best of luck.
Hey, Jeremiah.
Right.
Congrats.
Well, that'll do it for this edition of our Brown Bears podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Cordischi. Have a great week, everybody.